Our next speaker is Scott Davis from ThoughtWorks. He focuses on emerging technologies. He has books ranging from groovy recipes to the Google Maps API. So, as you can guess it, he's kind of a multidisciplinary guy. Today, he's here to talk about accessibility, or rather, his talk's title is It's Spelled Accessibility and Not Disability. Fun fact, Scott was there around at the birth of the Google Maps.
Yes.
Scott, can you tell us about your experience with Google Maps?
Absolutely. Google Maps, if you remember, came out in 2005. And when Jesse James Garrett coined the phrase AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML, he did that 2 weeks after Google Maps were released. And he said, that over there, that's what I'm talking about. So I wasn't with Google at the time. I was with the satellite imaging company that was providing the pixels. But it was so exciting being at one of those inflection points in the history of the World Wide Web that literally changed the course of the web. And that is what profoundly influenced me. I was a back-end Java developer before that, and that's what made me become very interested in the front end as a technology stack and has largely inspired what I'm going to talk to you about today.
So Scott is here to talk about why inclusive design matters. And don't forget to send your questions at slido. Scott, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Everyone, give it up for Scott.
Your applause is premature. You should wait to decide if you're enjoying my talk or not before you clap, okay? As we said, my name is Scott Davis. I'm a web architect with ThoughtWorks, a principal engineer. You'll see many ThoughtWorkers floating around today. I mentioned just in this introduction, I've been a web developer now for my entire career, 30 years. The Netscape Navigator 2.0 came out in 1995. And if you remember, Netscape Navigator is what introduced the world not only to JavaScript, but it introduced the world to Java as well. 2 key languages were released in 1995. I graduated from university in 1993. So I can tell you quite honestly that the web has changed my trajectory as a web developer. I spent 10 years on the back end. My first book for O'Reilly was JBoss at Work, but Google Maps and the front end is where my love really lies. I have a deep and abiding respect and love for this platform, this web platform that we're going to talk about today. So what I'd like to do is talk to you about accessibility. Now, before you groan, I know dictionary definitions are so trite, but I deeply love this definition. So if you'll bear with me, accessibility is the quality of being able to be reached. Accessibility is the quality of being easy to use. Accessibility is the quality of being easily understood. Now, as web developers, these are all things that should appeal to us, right? These should all be aspirational goals for us as developers, as web developers especially, because we touch the users. We are the front end. We are the website to most users. They don't understand the back end. They don't understand NoSQL databases or Oracle databases or Java or C# or Ruby, but they understand the screen that they see. So as web developers, accessibility should be deeply important to us. But yet when we do a search on web accessibility, none of those attributes appear that we just discussed. What comes up over and over again is disability. Now, let me be very clear. I don't want you to turn off your heart. I don't want you to not focus on web accessibility out of the goodness of your heart, out of a deep, abiding sense of your human nature. But the problem with focusing on disability when we're discussing ability is that it opens the door for all manner of excuses, doesn't it? Well, accessibility, I mean, do we really need this? I mean, how many people does this really affect? And well, We don't have budget for it. We don't have time in the schedule for it. We don't have any core expertise on this, so perhaps we'll move that to the bottom of our priority list. This is dangerous, isn't it? This is dangerous. So what I like doing when I'm talking about accessibility is I don't like focusing on the differences. I don't like focusing on the disabilities. What I like focusing on is something called universal design. And universal design was borrowed, stolen shamelessly, from the brick and mortar world. When we're talking about building buildings and public spaces using the idea of universal design, it means it's a design that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or any kind of specialized design. We shouldn't have to go out of our way to make things accessible. That should be the default. And do you see how that changes the conversation? As web developers, we get deeply upset when a website doesn't work well in our browser or device of choice. I'm so frustrated when I pull up a website on my iPhone and it doesn't look good. I'm so disappointed when I pull it up in Safari and it doesn't look good. We all remember the days of this website best viewed in Internet Explorer, right? None of this is universal design, and so we have this already baked into our DNA. We're deeply hurt when this doesn't work for all browsers and all devices. And that's good. I want us to hang on to that. But what we have to realize is I can move from the iPhone to a laptop. I can move from Safari to Chrome to solve these problems. If you have a hearing disability, if you have blindness or low vision, you don't have a device that you can change. So it's our job as developers to make our websites as broadly usable as possible. Yes, to Internet Explorer users and mobile users and desktop users, but people who have different abilities than we do as well. Does that make sense? Yeah? Very good. So I like doing this. I told you I'm a web developer. How many of us are web developers in here tonight? Raise your hand, please. Show of hands. How many of you are web developers? Oh, welcome, my people. Very good. I love that. All right, now let me ask you another question. How many of you have read the HTML spec? Raise them high. Raise them high. All right, there we go. Far fewer hands went up. What was going on there? Clearly, you're more clever than I am, right? If you're able to be successful with web development, not having read the rules of web development, you're clearly smarter than I am. I can't play the game without knowing the rules. And so if we read the spec, it's free, right? I mean, you're not going to be charged for this, yeah? It's on GitHub, right? Perhaps tonight, when you have a little free time? Who knows? But if we look at this list of editors, of course we see familiar names, Microsoft, Google, folks like that. This Steve Faulkner, though, in the Paciello group, is interesting. If you've not heard of the Paciello group, he's the lead editor on this spec, and the Paciello group, in fact, is a accessibility consultancy. So when I'm talking about accessibility, this isn't radical. This isn't fringe. This is core to what we do as web developers. And this is essential to what we do as web developers. So then, let me give you some real-world examples, and then we'll get into technology. I have lots of demos for you, lots of sound and videos and all manner of good things. But let's give some real-world examples to begin with. There's a law being broken in this image. Do you know what the law is that's being broken? Perhaps if I give you another example, you can tell. Do you notice the curb? Curb cuts, yes? So now, curb cuts have been enforced by law in the United States since the 1990s. The American with Disabilities Act, the ADA, was passed. And so curb cuts like this were enforced by law since the 1990s. So for 30 years, this has been the law of the land. So they've become so pervasive that they are, in fact, invisible, but they are a brilliant example of universal design. Because what we see is curb cuts are used by parents with children in strollers. They're used by business travelers like me pulling a suitcase behind us. They're used by bikers and skateboarders and roller skaters. And yes, of course, they're used by people in wheelchairs and walkers as well. This is universal design at its finest. And this isn't even a new concept. This is a curb cut from 1945 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So what happens is we have good ideas like this, and as they build more and more steam, eventually we codify them, and then we enforce them. And similar laws have been passed in Australia, and the UK, and the EU, and all manner of places saying curb cuts should just be a part of our public space. This is what we mean by universal design. And since curb cuts have had such a long history, we've had the ability to do sociological studies, anthropological studies on these things. This even has a term. It's called the curb cut effect. And if you do a web search on the curb cut effect, you'll see that a magnificent and unexpected thing happened when these became universal. Parents pushing strollers headed straight to the curb cuts. Workers pushing heavy carts. People with luggage, runners, skateboarders. They said that 9 out of 10 unencumbered pedestrians go out of their way for curb cuts. So what do you think? Can we describe curb cuts as something solely for the disabled? Or is it in fact something we all truly benefit from? Yeah? This is a theme I'm going to keep coming back to over and over again. This is not exceptional. This is fundamental to what we do, and this is essential to what we do. Let me give you one more example. I'm from Denver, Colorado. Can you tell? I'm not from around here. Yeah. So I'm from Denver, Colorado. This is from our university campus, University of Colorado. And it's a lovely campus. I love these red rocks. These are locally quarried. It makes me homesick right now. I've been on the road for over 3 weeks. I miss my wife and my kids. And so as I look at this building, I say, oh, I could walk right up. I don't have a problem with this entrance at all. The 3 stairs don't bother me. The lack of a handrail doesn't bother me. The narrow door frames don't bother me. The lack of an automatic button to open these doors don't bother me. What does bother me is that tiny blue sign in the lower right-hand corner. This is the meat space equivalent of this door best viewed in Internet Explorer. This is, if you're in a wheelchair, your entrance is over there. That's not okay. That's not okay. So when we look at something like this is an interesting approach, isn't it? All of a sudden we've eliminated the stairs. We have a much wider door frame. We have automatic door opening right here. But, well, this is good. This is very good. We can do better. We can do better. This is my grocery store. In fact, this is the entrance to my grocery store. It's a hole in the wall. Not my store. I love my grocery store, right? I mean, the door is literally a hole in the wall. It's wide enough for parents with strollers to walk through. It's wide enough for shopping carts to roll through. And yes, it's wide enough for people in wheelchairs and walkers to walk through as well. The brick and mortars of grocery stores in the United States are paragons of universal design. This doesn't feel exceptional to me. This feels normal and expected. Yeah? So when we started seeing lawsuits come up, filed under the American with Disabilities Act, when we saw them come up against grocery stores of all places, I thought, this makes no sense. How can the brick and mortars be so very accessible and the websites be so not accessible? And we begin seeing lawsuits like this increasing year over year. In 2018, there are over 10,000 lawsuits filed against websites under the Americans with Disabilities Act. This tells me there's a real problem in what we're doing right now. There's something we're not doing right. There was an artist who sued Blick Art Materials for their website. And Blick actually asked the court to exempt websites from the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the judge, I won't read you the whole quote, but the judge said, it would be a cruel irony to adopt the interpretation of the ADA espoused by Blick. The irony that the Americans with Disabilities Act didn't apply to websites when arguably people with disabilities are the ones who need accessible websites the most. Yeah? So, we're going to give some examples in code now of what accessibility looks like. But let me give you the shortcut right now. We do a great job of dealing with one sense when we're building websites, yes? All I'm asking us to do as web developers is consider two senses. If your website looks good on screen, if the text is readable on screen, how does it sound? Have you ever listened to your website? You know what you can do? You can ask Siri or Alexa right now. When I walk into my kitchen in the morning, I say, hey, Alexa, play me some Bob Marley. And she plays me some Bob Marley, and I'm happy. Yeah? I can also say, hey, Alexa, Wikipedia Star Wars. And in fact, she begins reading me the Wikipedia article on Star Wars. We are coming to the era now with smart speakers where we're surfing the web in a device that has neither a keyboard nor a mouse nor even a screen. But yet this information is heard. This is not theoretical. This is not far future. This is not science fiction. This is here now today. So if you can read your text, you should listen to it as well. If you can hear your videos, you should be able to read them as well. And if your website is navigable with 101 keys and a mouse, it should also be navigable with fingers or any other way that we want to manipulate this. This, again, is universal design, isn't it? Yeah? So, let's see some examples here. Because what I want you to come away with is looking at the web in a slightly different way. That's all I ask. Not specific techniques, but just have your eyes opened a little bit wider than they were before, realizing all the different ways we're able to surf the web. So to begin, I know that you haven't read the spec, so if you'll indulge me, I'll read it to you, yeah? HTML is the World Wide Web's core markup language. HTML, hypertext markup language. Hypertext is linking documents together. Markup language is the language we use to create the hyperlinks. Tim Berners-Lee invented HTML at CERN, as a matter of fact, where the Large Hadron Collider was. He invented HTTP, the hypertext transport protocol, how we transfer pages back and forth. He had invented the first web server. He invented the first web browser. He's deeply invested in this, isn't he? Yes. And so what he did, HTML was primarily designed as a language for semantically describing scientific documents. Now that's an interesting word, semantically describing these documents. Because semantics means meaning. I love this definition. Our job as web developers is to quite literally add meaning to the world, to bring meaning to the world in the form of these elements that we use with intent. Because this word semantics is all through the spec. Documents are built from elements. Each element has a predefined meaning. So it's our job to understand what the meaning of these elements are and use them appropriately. If I'm trying to put together a bread recipe, you'll see headers in here, header 1, header 2, and of course, when I was taught HTML, I was taught that header 1, big, header 2, not so big, header 3, smaller still, right? That's focusing on the visual aspect of it, when in fact, if we would have understood the meaning of it, the semantics, we would have said header 1 is our main point. It's our title, if you will, is what show on the title of a book. And all your H2s are the chapters of this book. And so in this book on how to bake bread, I have a paragraph in there, and chapter 2 begins with my ingredients. And we'll see that ingredients are in fact an unordered list of list items, right? A UL of LIs. And as we see how it's rendered, when I was taught, it's like, oh yeah, if you want bullets to show up, it's UL LI. And certainly that's how they appear on the screen. But if we consider the meaning, an unordered list means it doesn't matter what order the list items are in, right? If I'm getting ready to bake bread, does it matter if I pull the flour out of the pantry first or the yeast? Does it matter if I pour the water first? Of course not. It's an unordered list. All these things can be had in any order you'd prefer. Now, my instructions. They're LIs as well, but is this an unordered list? No, this is an ordered list, in fact, because the order of these steps are important. If I preheated my oven to 450 degrees and then let the bread sit on the counter for 18 hours, order is important. Meaning is important. So as we read these specs, we see these elements represent sections. And when I saw this, I'm like, well, I don't write HTML that way. I just use these H1s. But in fact, every time you're putting one of these headers in, you're creating a new chapter in your book, you're creating a new section. These two snippets are semantically equivalent. They mean the same thing. So if that's the case, I could use CSS to make my H1 smaller than H2, right? It's easy. Here we go. I'll make my H1 1M. I'll make my H2 2M. And as I render it, does that change the look and feel of the website? Absolutely. Does it change the semantics? Not in the least. And what's especially interesting about this is if we use assistive technology to listen to the semantics of our website, it's eye-opening. It's eye-opening. Now, when I come into clients, they say, oh, well, part of the reason we don't have accessibility is we really don't have tools to test for accessibility, right? We don't have software. We don't have that as part of our build pipeline. I said, you don't have tools to test accessibility? Are you kidding me? Reach into your pocket, please. You don't have to do that. I'm talking to these fictional clients of mine, right? Yeah, reach into this pocket right here. As a developer, what you should be doing every time is reach into your pocket, triple click on your phone, and listen to the semantics. You don't need expensive tool suites. You, in fact, should use the device that your users are using. Of course, this works on Android as well. This works across all desktops as well. So let me give you an example right now of what this sounds like when I pull out my iPhone and triple click and listen to the semantics of my website.
VoiceOver on. Safari. Address 192.168.1.108. Double tap to show controls. Portrait. Headings. 3 links. Form controls. Tables. Form control. Links. Headings.
Now I'm going to stop right here for a second. We clearly see that we're about to listen to our headings, right? But many times people say, well, wait a second, what's going on? I've never seen that screen before, right? We're missing part of the story. I'm giving you that story visually, but I'm not telling you the clicks that I'm using to do that. So in just a moment here, I'll turn on some subtitles, and I'll play this for you once again. And you tell me if this is easier to understand now with subtitles on. Look right
VoiceOver
down
on.
here.
Safari. Address 192.168.1.108. Double tap to show controls. Portrait. Headings. 3 links. Form controls. Tables. Form control. Links. Headings. 3 headings. No need bread. Heading level 1. Ingredients. Heading level 2. Instructions. Heading level 2. Screen curtain on.
Here's where it gets good.
Ingredients. Heading level 2. No need bread. Heading level 1. No kneading required. 4 simple ingredients, baked in a Dutch oven. The result is simple perfection, hands down the best bread you'll ever eat. Screen curtain off.
Which experience did you prefer? Experience 1 or experience 2? Experience 1, you were left out. You could see what was going on, but you couldn't see what was going on with my hand. So what I did was I added a second sense. Now, I could have gone in and graphically superimposed where my fingers are, but in fact, I used closed captioning. I brought another sense in, and all of a sudden, this was a far richer experience for you than it was before. Imagine now if I played this video for you without the sound turned on. We'd have to adjust again, wouldn't we? Without your ears to tell you what's going on, I'd have to provide you a secondary sense to give you an idea of what's being read on screen. This is all closed captions are. They're bringing a second sense to the party. And while these closed captions, I mean, we don't have software that does that. We don't have a agency to do that. Oh, you can create a plain text file using the web VTT format. This is a W3C standard web visual text track. Quite literally, this is plain text. It's that preamble, those 3 lines right there, and then it's simply start time, end time. At 5 seconds to 12 seconds, I'd like to triple click to be displayed on the screen. From 17 seconds to 25 seconds, I'd like to use this 2-finger spin. This is all it took for me to create these closed captions, and then when I loaded up my video, I had a track of kind captions that referenced these captions right here. This is trivial to add to your website, but can you see how value added it is to bring to your website? Now, if I didn't want to encourage my users to triple click and swipe down and do all manner of things like that, I can do the same thing in JavaScript. And this is what's brilliant. Accessibility is there. It's baked into the platform. We can use JavaScript to surface it. Notice that I have a button down here, and I knew up a speech synthesis utterance. And once I have that speech synthesis utterance, I utter it. I wish I uttered it. Wouldn't that be brilliant? I don't utter utterances. I apparently speak utterances. Yes? But this is framework free. This is baked into every modern browser for at least the past 10 years. This is simply a part of what we have available to us as web developers. Yeah? So if we want to see this in action, and I hope you do, that wasn't rhetorical. Yes? Here's what it sounds like right now when I click on this button, read intro.
No kneading required. 4 simple ingredients, baked in a Dutch oven. The result is simple perfection, hands down the best bread you'll ever eat. The simplicity of this no-knead bread is what I love the most, and the fact that your entire house will smell of fresh bread as you bake this. This bread could not get any easier. It's even easier than the artisan bread.
Now, if we had more time, I would show you how to go in and adjust the voice. It can be a woman's voice. It can be a man's voice. It could be a woman's voice with an Indian accent. It could be a woman's voice with a Hungarian accent. It could be a man's voice with a Spanish accent. We have a whole variety of synthesized voices available to us. But speaking of voice, notice the second button, request section to be read. I can speak to my browser just as easily as I can ask my browser to speak to me. Now, here's where I'll find if the demo gods are happy with me or not. Yes? I believe I've pleased the demo gods, but there's only one way to find out. Ingredients.
3 cups all-purpose flour, 1 3/4 teaspoon salt, 1 2 teaspoon active dry yeast, 1 2 cups water room temperature.
Instructions.
In a big bowl, mix the flour, salt and yeast together. Pour water into the bowl and using a spatula or a wooden spoon mix it until well incorporated.
All this, 70 lines of JavaScript. All of this available to you in every modern browser out there. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about universal design. We have these features available to us. We don't need frameworks. We don't need extra toolkits. It's just there waiting for us to use. Brilliant. Brilliant, isn't it? So there's so much excitement about TensorFlow these days, machine learning. Oh, I'm just as excited as you are. Let's see here. All right, here's my real time. Let's pull up my live demo. This is what it should do. Again, if I have not asked too much of the great demo gods, but oh, mighty demo gods, don't abandon me now. Here we come. So as I'm talking to you right now, we can begin seeing my arms and all manner of things available to us, right? Now, this uses TensorFlow, but again, this is available to us on every modern browser using just my camera now. And while this is all fun and good, having dots pop up all over me, there was someone who took that to the next step, and they actually used TensorFlow to recognize American Sign Language so they could sign to Alexa. But of course, if you're using ASL, you can't hear, so they also had to use speech to text to let Alexa's responses show up on screen so we could participate. So let me show you a brief video. It's only 4 or 5 hours, so settle in, it's great. There'll be sound in just a moment.
Alexa. Hello.
Hi there.
Alexa. What is the weather?
Right now in New York, it's 29 degrees Celsius with partly sunny skies. Today's forecast has lots of clouds, with a high of 34 degrees and a low of 24 degrees.
Incredible, isn't it? With free and open source software, modern browsers, and a consumer electronic device that you can pick up for under $100 US. These kinds of things are not science fiction. They're here with us right here today. So, where does this leave us? If this is this easy, if what I just showed you was well under 100 lines of JavaScript and available to us in every modern browser, then this kind of technology must be pervasive. Yeah? Remember when I talked about how upset we get when a website doesn't work on our particular device or our particular browser? I was just on a conference call less than 2 weeks ago where someone said, oh, I'm not sure if we can use it because Internet Explorer, right? Because IE, that's been our refrain for as long as I can remember, but Internet Explorer. If we break that number down, we begin seeing that IE has a whopping 2% of our market share right now. Now, I am not telling you that we should ignore the 2% of users that are clinging so tightly to that out-of-date browser, right? Clearly something has happened to them in their life. There's some trauma that I'm not aware of. Maybe they're just corporate developers, yeah? But whatever happens to them, they're holding on to this browser. So yes, let's be sure we support the 2% that are using out-of-date, unsupported browsers. But in addition to that, there are 1 billion people in the world right now that have a disability. That is between 15 and 20% of the world's population. There are only about 20 million software developers in the world, and I'm rounding up. Most estimates are about 18 million. That is not even 1% of the planet's population. That's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%. And so, yes, we must continue to support all browsers and all devices, but we can't ignore the largest minority on the planet. Do you have enough revenue that you could afford to lose 20% of your user base? That's negative, isn't it? Let me spin it a positive way. Would you like to add 20% revenue to your bottom line? a hidden 20% that you didn't know exist, and something that is so easy to support by simply using the tools we already have available to us. Simply using the browsers we already have available to this. This feels like a no-brainer to me. But let's check the web and see what the web says. In February 2019 of this year, WebAIM Organization did a survey of the top 1 million websites across the web, checking them for accessibility errors. Across those 1 million websites, they found 60 million accessibility errors. Let me help you out with the math. 1 million websites, 60 million accessibility errors, on average 60 accessibility errors per page. On average, one error every 13 elements that we put on our web pages. 98% of all websites had over 60 errors on them, and these errors are incredibly avoidable. Low contrast text, missing alt text on an image, not using a label for an input field, empty links, empty buttons. How easy is this for us to solve? This is the perfect alignment of a massive problem and a trivial solution. A trivial solution that doesn't involve web frameworks. Because on that survey of 1 million websites, they said, oh, interesting. Well, let's take a look at React. Oh, wow. On web pages that use React, they had on average a 10% increase in accessibility errors. On websites that used Angular, they had an average of a 20% increase in accessibility errors. On websites that used Vue, a 25% increase in accessibility errors. As web developers, when we depend on web frameworks, and we do depend on web frameworks, part of what we depend on is they know more than we do. They are helping us. These web frameworks are supposed to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Now, the study authors go on to say this doesn't necessarily mean that the frameworks caused those errors, but there is a very clear correlation between the usage of web frameworks and a dramatic increase in accessibility errors. This is empirically proved. And let's consider why for a moment. Spans. Remember we said all HTML elements have meaning? What is the meaning of span? Nothing. Quite literally nothing. By design, a span is a generic inline element which does not inherently represent anything. But if we read a little bit farther down, a span and a div should only be used when no other semantic element is appropriate. Think about that for a moment. No one in this room, of course, but how many of your colleagues use divs and spans as the element of first choice as opposed to the element of last choice? It's chilling, isn't it? Spans and divs are quite literally the potato chips of the web development world, the crisps of the web development world, the French fries of the web development world. They're literally empty calories. And we are dying of malnutrition. We are dying of malnutrition. Because as bad as you thought those statistics were, they are almost certainly worse. Because this static analysis tool can tell you if you're using a paragraph wrong, or an image wrong, or an anchor wrong. How are you using a div wrong? It has no meaning, so we ignore it. How can we tell if we're using a span wrong? It has no meaning, so we ignore it. So if you think about the amount of divs and spans in your website right now, the number of accessibility errors that you have are almost certainly dramatically higher than what I just demonstrated here. HTML is a language for semantically describing documents. And this is lowercase s. We're not even talking about capital S semantics. We're not talking about linked data or JSON LD or anything like that. We can't even begin to have that conversation, can we? Until we have solved the simple matter of document semantics. Until we solve this universal design problem, we are absolutely being held back for the greatness that the web could be versus what the web is today. So where does this leave us? Accessibility is the quality of being easy to reach, easy to use, easy to understand. And when we tie accessibility to disability, it opens the door for all manner of excuses and bad business practices. When in fact, instead of focusing on the differences, if we could focus on the similarities, if we could focus on the universal design, a design that is usable by all people to the greatest extent possible, without the need for adaptation or specialized design. If you'll indulge me, I have one more 2-minute video I'd like to share with you right now, and then we can open the floor to questions. Another short video, only 2 minutes. Please enjoy it.
People think that having a disability is a barrier. But that's not the way I see it. You can catch up with friends.
Ready?
You can capture a moment with your family.
One face, small face, focus lock.
And you can start the day bright and early. You can take a trip to somewhere new.
3 miles to the summit.
You can concentrate on every word of a story.
A bird began to sing. Jack opened his eyes.
You can take the long way home. Or edit a film like this one. When technology is designed for everyone, it lets anyone do what they love, including me.
Isn't that just lovely? The woman we saw in the video is a woman named Sadie. Did you pick up that she, in fact, was the editor of that film? She was actually producing the film. Did you notice who was narrating the film? Did you notice it was Siri narrating the film the entire time? This was produced by Apple, and this hardware is in your pocket right now. This is not a specialized version of the iPhone. This is not a specialized version of a watch. This is the iPad, the iPhone, the watch you own right now. If you go to google.com/accessibility, this is on your Android device and your Android watch. If you go to microsoft.com/accessibility, this is on your Windows platform and baked into your Xbox. I showed you the technology here in a browser. This is not the future. This is not radical. This is not exceptional. This is core to what we do. This is fundamental to what we do. This is essential to what we do as web developers. Did you enjoy yourself? I did as well. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Scott Davis, everyone. Thank you, Scott, for bringing this topic to our attention. Accessibility is my main favorite topic. I'm also an advocate of accessibility, so I'm very glad to hear this from you.
Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, we have only a little short time for answering questions. If you hit up slido.com, you can still upvote some of these questions. First, I want to address a question to you. What do you think is the reason there's a correlation between using modern web frameworks, JavaScript frameworks, and the lack of accessibility?
So I experienced this in the real world. I was on the Lufthansa website, and I was trying to book my ticket home, actually. I love Budapest, don't get me wrong, but I've been on the road for 3 weeks. I miss my wife and kids. I want to get home. So I was on the Lufthansa website, and I was trying to put in my credit card information, and it didn't work. Now, the accessibility I was looking for was information in English on a fundamentally German language website. And so the website was internationalized, but in fact the problem was they used divs and spans for that drop-down box instead of the intrinsic option box, combo box, select option widget that is baked into every platform. They did more work and they degraded my user experience, but they also degraded everyone's user experience that needed the accessibility baked into those web components. When we don't use web components as designed for their use, everyone loses. How many times have you been to a website on your mobile phone where they ask you for an email and you tap into that field and there is no magic @ button? That is a semantics fail. That is because they said input type equals text instead of type equals email. When we add the semantics to our platform, the platforms adapt to our needs. We get magic keyboards, we get accessibility, we get what we need to be equal participants in that.
Thank you for the answer, and I'm sorry for not asking the most upvoted question. I'd like to ask questions that are not as loaded. So I'm going to ask this one. Are there any materials than the HTML specs that you would recommend for learning the core of accessibility?
Oh, I am so glad you asked. Yes. Wait, other than specs? No. Let me pull up specs for you, yes? There is the WAI project, WAI, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative right here. And if you go to the Web Accessibility Initiative right here, they have tools, they have videos, they have tutorials. They have all the things that you can do to use the tools you already have on your platform to begin doing these kinds of things. This is an education problem, not a talent problem. I know so many developers who are up to date on React. They read every new tutorial about Angular that comes out. They embrace Vue and go to conferences and write tutorials and speak at conferences. And yet, as we saw in here, almost none of them have written the spec. If you are interested in component-oriented web development, I am as well. And don't get me wrong, I use these frameworks. I've written books about these frameworks, yes? You're not a bad person for using a framework, yes? Now that you have the awareness, you are going to be able to fix the framework that you are using. But if you want another good example of this, Google has a wonderful developer advocate named Rob Dodson that has a series of YouTube videos called Alleycast. Alley, A11Y, is a word that begins with A, ends with Y, and has 11 letters in between, yes? Accessibility. So if you go to Rob Dodson's Alleycast, he has a whole series of very short, very concise, very informative web tutorials that you can use to get yourself going on these kinds of things. But really the most important tool you have is the phone that's in your pocket. Go into your general settings, turn on accessibility, triple click. There is no tool that is better than you, the sophisticated web developer out there who knows what the user experience should be for your users. If you triple click and swipe through your websites, you'll know instantly if you have solved the problem or if you still have work yet to do. That's the easiest way to solve this. Pull out your phone, triple click, and fix it.
Thank you. Big +1 for the Alleycasts channel. And down with the spans and the divs. And let me give you this present from the organizers of Craft Conference. It's a special personal present for you.
A tutorial, a portrait, a caricature of me. This is lovely. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you once again. Thank you.